Welcome to a Rice University podcast. For more information about us, please visit our website at www.rice.edu.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming out, and welcome to this colloquium in our continuing series on the theme of biopolitics. I'm Susan McIntosh, Director of Scientia, and I wanted to just note for people who received a response card coming in and indicated you have not filled out one, please remember to do that. It helps us figure out where you're hearing about our colloquia and how to do a better job in getting the word around, and you can just drop them off on the table outside when you leave. I just came from a class where I was teaching about the origins of food production, and it's interesting to think about food production as it is practiced today in the industrialized world. It is, of course, a set of vast human-controlled biological systems that intersect with politics and policies at all levels. But if we look back over the 10,000-year history of food production and consider how selection for traits that made plants and animals easier to tend or more productive unleashed a spiraling of population growth and a consequent increase in reliance on those domestic species that continues in hypertrophied form today. At various points in the past, we can see how agricultural systems in particular were prone to fail. In some areas where climate was changing, you think of the American Southwest in the late 13th century, for example, and in other areas where intensive modifications of the landscapes by irrigation made soils too saline to grow crops ultimately. You add to that these massive new dimensions of environmental modification once energy inputs to agriculture, which had previously been totally reliant on animal and human muscle power and simple machines, jumped exponentially once in the era of fossil fuels. And then add to that the impact of the discovery in the 20th century of a chemical method for nitrogen fixation, making chemical fertilizer possible. And we have the scope of environmental modification and degradation being phenomenal. And this brings us to where we are today. We have a phenomenally productive food system that is both vulnerable to the failure or disruption at any point in the highly interlinked production system, and a system that's also highly destructive of the environments around it, both near and far. So sustainability in food production is our topic today, with a focus specifically on the college campus, and we're very fortunate indeed to have Dr. Peggy Barlett as our speaker, and she has been a leading figure in the campus sustainability movement. Today's format is going to be a 35 or so minute talk, followed by 5-minute responses and comments by two panelists who can provide a Rice perspective on campus sustainability issues. We have Richard Johnson, who is Director of Sustainability here at Rice and Associate Director of the Center for the Study of Environment and Society, and Dr. Jennifer Rudgers, who is the James Godwin Assistant Professor of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology, and she teaches a community agriculture course that manages 4 vegetable and herb gardens on campus. So I want to introduce with great pleasure our speaker today, Peggy Barlett, Goodrich C. White Professor of Anthropology at Emory University, where she's taught for over 30 years. She's been a leader in bringing the university to its current commitment to sustainability. She's written on the challenges of transforming higher education. She's written Sustainability on Campus, Stories and Strategies for Change, published by MIT Press in 2004, and leads workshops on curriculum development and faculty engagement with sustainability around the country through the AASHE, the American Association for Sustainability in Higher Education. She's co-founder of the Piedmont Project at Emory and editor of Urban Place, Reconnecting with the Natural World, also published by MIT in 2005. This book highlights research on the mental and physical health impacts of nature contact and the reawakening engagement with place around the country. She leads Emory's Sustainable Food Initiative, which has set bold goals for local and sustainably grown food on campus, supports 7 educational food gardens and a farmer's market. Barlett is the author of an award-winning study of the U.S. farm crisis of the 1980s, American Dreams, Rural Realities, Family Farms in Crisis, published by University of North Carolina Press, and brings her expertise on agricultural systems in developing countries to her work at Emory. She is active in her local Watershed Alliance and seeks to combine the science behind sustainability with the joy and satisfaction of deeper engagement with the animate earth. So speaking on the Sustainable Campus, Food Policies in Place, please help me welcome Peggy Barlett.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate a chance to visit Rice. We hear about Rice all the time and fight with you for students and other awards, and so it's a great pleasure to be here. I was recently at the ASHE conference last week and was very moved by a comment that was made there by Lester Brown about glaciers. We all know the glaciers are melting, but I didn't quite understand the speed that the latest report is showing in Greenland, and it helps me contextualize what we're about at this moment. Usually glaciers move hundreds of yards a year, but the main glacier in Greenland right now is moving 2 meters, 2 yards an hour. And chunks of it are falling off into the ocean with such regularity, and as they fall, the weight of all that ice and water lifts from the earth in a way that creates a seismic shock to the country. The urgency of universities to both teach about and act on our concerns about a sustainable earth, it seems to me, have not ever been greater. And when we look at our own impacts as individuals, our number 1 impact usually on the earth is transportation, but our number 2 impact is food. And so how we spend our food dollar, which system is supported by our daily life choices around what to eat and where to eat it, are very, very important. So I'm very honored to be here and glad to have a chance to share with you some thoughts about sustainable food. And I thought I'd start with just a quick overview of sustainable food. I've been asked to talk a little bit about the sustainability actions at Emory, and then come back to specifics about the food system. Food is hot, at least in the Atlanta area, and I think it probably is here. And if I didn't get it before, I definitely got it last year when we had Barbara Kingsolver come to speak, and the lines were so huge. Thousands of people came out. And what were they talking about? They were talking about growing heritage breed bourbon red turkeys and about how much petroleum is embedded in our food. And the security guard, as we brought them up to the door and people have been waiting in line for hours to get good seats, said, "You guys are rock stars or something." And I thought, wow, rock stars talking about food. Times have changed. It used to be my area was a little off in the esoteric edge, but it's a nice change. So there are 4 main dimensions of campus sustainable food projects. And the first dimension has to do with dining. The official dining program, many schools are purchasing locally and looking at how the food is grown. That also includes commitments to fair trade, which I understand you have around coffee, could also be around bananas. This is a picture of a student-run coffee cart that started at Emory that features fair trade and organic. Changes in the menu, particularly moving toward more meatless meals. Some schools have adopted some sophisticated composting. Biodiesel, the Emory grease from all of our fryers goes into biodiesel for our shuttle system. And so a number of things related to the actual food we serve. And then there's a second area of connection having to do with direct marketing of our relationship with our local farmers, farmers markets, which you have, and Emory just started this year, consumer-supported agriculture, community-supported agriculture involving boxes, prepaid boxes of food that help support farmers, particularly that are just getting started. And then we have the issue of campus farms. And this is one area that I find particularly fascinating. I visited the Yale farm, this is a picture from November. It's absolutely beautiful. 300 students, one way or another, are involved in growing food here. And I found in a quick review of the country that not only the land-grant schools, which you would expect, although many of these land-grant schools have shifted from their regular farms to organic farms. But some of these elite liberal arts colleges, a few of them always had farms, but most of these are new and they're organic, and these are the kinds of students that I've been teaching for all of my career who do not have farm backgrounds, don't know anything about food production, and yet they are initiating efforts to start farms. And then, of course, we have the wonderful examples like Berea and Warren Wilson that have been doing it for a long, long time. The fourth area is curriculum innovation. We're seeing undergraduate concentrations. Yale, not a land-grant school, doesn't have any formal agriculture, has 22 courses in 20 disciplines related to sustainable agriculture. There's a new PhD program in the anthropology of food, and then courses at all different kinds of schools. So those are some of the things that are happening around the country. And what's the context that we can understand them? Getting off the ground, sustainability began really at Emory 10 years ago, although some parts of recycling and our alternative transportation program began more like 15 years ago. But the key moment really was in 2005 when the Board of Trustees approved sustainability as one of the fundamental principles underlying the institution. And this came as a part of the strategic plan effort that had gone on for about 2 years and that identified sustainability as one of the areas that we now needed to attend to. Emory has a major footprint. We have 9 academic units and 3 hospitals. It's actually closer to 1,200 students now. We are the 6th largest customer of Georgia Power, and we're the largest employer in our county. And so what we do has an enormous impact on food and on a whole bunch of other areas. So I'm just going to note some of the areas that we have been working on to begin to think about what is our long-term impact. How can we begin to seek that intersection of the environmental, the social, and the economic that sustainability represents. With green buildings, we have found that the small 1% to 2% increased cost in building a building is more than paid for within 5 years, often less, and then the building operates highly efficiently and effectively for the rest of its life. We now have the most square footage on any campus, and we're proud of that because we don't get any subsidies, we don't get any encouragement to do that. But we've come to realize that it's penny wise and pound foolish not to do that, that LEED buildings really are more sensible in the long run. Our campus has a number of forested ravines, and Atlanta is a city that suffers from the heat island effect, as I believe you do as well, and smog, which I believe is known here as well, and all those things are counteracted by trees. So protecting our forests has become an important commitment. We now have 54% of our green space protected in perpetuity by the Board of Trustees. And when we first started this research, one of my students did a project interviewing the vice president who was in charge of growth, and he said, you know, we used to call this idle land because it was land we were holding for building buildings. And today we think of it as a biodiverse living laboratory, both for education and for the climate benefit of the whole community. Our goal is to restore all the forests on campus. They have many invasive species problems, and we hope that will be something that students become active in. As part of our strategic plan, we took each of these areas and developed goals, deliverables, as the administration calls them. And our deliverable on energy is that we want to reduce our energy use 25% per square foot between 2005 and 2015, given that our plan was to increase square footage by almost a third during that period. This is a very, very intense goal. We also have plans with water conservation. We're in the middle of a major drought. We've done a number of things, but we have a lot more we need to do, especially in terms of stormwater management. We have put low-flow showers, and we've got some wonderful cisterns that are helping us get through this drought. We have a goal of 65% waste diversion from landfills, and that seemed in 2005 to be pretty ambitious, but now we're already at 55, and we're realizing that was probably set a little too low. We could really do more, I think, with recycling. Atlanta is a city that does not have good public transportation in the area that Emory is located, and we have had to develop a shuttle system. Our shuttles are all alternatively fueled, either biodiesel or compressed natural gas, and we now run the biggest shuttle system next to the municipal shuttle system. We also have some really dynamic programs in van pools and carpools, and the Park and Ride, which just opened last year, has attracted hundreds of people to parking lots at shopping centers way out on the edge of the city, so that then they take a bus into the Emory area, which, because of the hospitals and the relatively small neighborhood streets, is a rather congested area. One of the things I'm most excited about is the mixed-use development. As we began to think about sustainability and how do we meet our goals of reducing the greenhouse gases, we realized that one of our biggest problems is that it is difficult to get to Emory any other way but single occupancy vehicles. And we're not going to get rapid transit in this part of the city anytime soon. So the administration began to think that one alternative, in addition to alternative transportation solutions, is to get more people to live closer. But the neighborhood is a pretty well-to-do neighborhood. It's the neighborhood, if you saw Driving Miss Daisy, it was shot a few blocks from the campus, and so it's not an area that's easy to buy a home in. And so what we have decided to do is to work together with a number of private landowners within a 3-mile radius of the campus to develop some nodes of mixed-use housing and shops and recreational development. So this area, for instance, is a relatively underdeveloped strip on the edge of the campuses up here. And we're working now with this owner to build several hundred units of condos and apartments, all of which will be walking distance from Emory, and the people who live there will not be allowed to have a parking pass by the rules of getting your apartment there. So we think this will begin to create, there's some great stores and restaurants that are planning to move in here, and it might really begin to shift the feel of the neighborhood toward a more live, work, play, mixed-use life. I think that's a really creative way in which universities can take our clout, work with private industry for the mutual benefit and a more sustainable future. We've also really worked hard with curriculum, and we are now in year 8 of our faculty development program, helping 20 faculty a year add sustainability to their courses. The Piedmont Project, it's called, and it's become a model for other schools around the country. Happy to talk more about that if you're interested. But Emory as place is one of the unique things that we have done with sustainability, and I'm very excited about it because we've come to realize that in addition to the kind of story that I told you when I started this talk, which is the "oh my God, ain't it awful" story, we have to balance that kind of scientific understanding of where we are on the earth today with a more powerful personal connection with the place where we live. That without having both of those, the knowledge of climate change or the understanding of food miles, with a sense of who the farmers are or where we are located in our case, the Piedmont, we are really not going to be able to bring about this change. Culture change on this level, at this magnitude, at the speed with which we have to do it, is going to require major paradigm shifts. And if we don't have that joy, that sensitivity, that delight in the earth, I believe we are not going to have the ability to do that work. And so part of what we're doing is trying to discover our place, and that means the people and it's their history as well as the natural history. And it has been a very exciting, positive part of the sustainability movement at Emory. So let me shift now to sustainable food. This part of our work has been for me a little bit of a surprise and a great joy because as the lovely introduction mentioned, I spent my life studying farmers. I consider myself an economic anthropologist. My work was in rural areas. And here I found myself in a city, the poster child for sprawl, aware that we had to begin to move to reduce our negative impact on the earth and to live within the limits of our system. And I thought as I was shifting to sustainability and urban studies that I was leaving behind my work with farmers. And then lo and behold, what begins to emerge in the sustainability and higher education movement is sustainable food initiatives. And so I began to be excited about that possibility at Emory. And then when we held the retreat to really begin to formulate some of the strategic plan goals for sustainability, it was the physicians in the room who kept saying, we have got to include food. We have got to change how we eat. America is becoming so obese. All this evidence now that what we eat is connected to cancer and heart disease, and we have got to diabetes, we've got to change. So we ended up with a commitment that 75% of the food served on campus and in hospitals will be by 2015 locally grown or sustainably grown, it should be or, and that healthy, nutritious food will be served at all hours of the day. This is, as far as I can tell, the boldest goal that anybody has selected in the country. We don't know yet if we're going to be able to do it, but we are setting out with every anticipation that we can. So the Sustainable Food Committee was appointed by the President to begin to work on all the components of the project, and our first task was to clarify what do we mean by sustainable. We say if we're going to have 75% of our food either local or sustainable, what do we mean by those terms? And we, after a lot of research, decided that we would adopt as our goal in terms of local 2 tiers. First, Georgia. Didn't make any sense to us to use the definition that some schools have, which is a 50-mile radius or 150-mile, even 200-mile, very cleverly cuts off the major agricultural regions of the state, all of whom already bring their stuff to Atlanta. So it didn't really seem very smart to use miles. So we said Georgia. We just couldn't imagine saying to our distributor, we want South Carolina produce, but only the first half of the state. You know, we just didn't see that working. And so we said for our second tier, the 8-state southern region. In terms of sustainably produced, we do not want to get in the business of running around checking up how farmers grow their food. So we want to use certification systems that are already third-party verified, in place, trusted, known, and then we'll just work with those systems. And again, I can say more about this if you're interested, but we have some interest in organic, but we're really much more interested in Food Alliance. Food Alliance is really beyond organic and is a certification system that now exists in the Far West and the Midwest, and we're bringing it to the Southeast now through our efforts. And it includes not only soils and biodiversity of your seeds and crop varieties. It involves humane animal treatment. It involves wages and working conditions for labor. It involves water flow off of your property, so that it really is assessing the whole system. But it's also more forgiving than organic certification, so that you can be Food Alliance certified even if you're not all the way there yet as you're transitioning out of conventional, because part of it is a 3-year improvement plan. And so we think it's going to work better. The University of Georgia thinks it's going to work well. And so we are looking to partner with them to help more Georgia farmers become Food Alliance certified. We also have goals for seafood and livestock and fair trade. Where do these concerns come from? Well, using the triple bottom line, let's look at environmental issues. Clearly, there are major problems with food miles, the fossil fuel use that goes into our food. I'm sure you all know the study that shows the average piece of food in the United States travels 1,500 miles before it reaches our plate. I've been told for Atlanta it's probably closer to 2,000 miles because of our location. So we want to reduce food miles. The way we're growing food today includes a lot of topsoil, a lot of water degradation, biodiversity problem that you mentioned so well. We have some questions about pesticide residues. One of the top public health researchers on the issue of pesticides is at Emory, and he has demonstrated that children in America, pretty much all children in America, carry in their bloodstream measurable residues of the primary pesticides, and at larger doses, these pesticides are demonstrated to have neurological damage. And he has shown that if you put kids on an organic diet, within 1 week, all of those residues are gone. If you put them back on a normal diet, within a week, the residues come back into the bloodstream. So we are part of a big national experiment to find out really what it does to children's bodies to carry pesticide residues, and we're concerned about that. There's also issues of nutritional content. We really care, too, about the fair economic return to farmers. In order to enjoy a tomato in the winter, we are supporting a very painful and difficult system of food production in Mexico that involves very harsh conditions and low pay for workers. The same thing, unfortunately, is true in Florida. And so as we are looking to become a more sustainable society, we need to think about equity issues. We also want to be sure that there's a vibrant regional economy, and Georgia's positioned in a situation where we could have a really very dynamic small and medium-sized farm sector again. It's a major agricultural state, and we are excited about being part of stimulating that growth to the economy. If we're going to have a crisis, I shouldn't say if, when we have a crisis of petroleum, we are going to need to have food nearby. We cannot ship food as much as we do across the country, and if we have turned it all into parking lots and subdivisions, we are not going to be able to do that. So part of what we need to be about is farmland preservation around our major cities. One of the things that's been interesting to me as an anthropologist is to look at the paradigm shift among farmers about what is considered good farming. And the sustainability paradigm does involve a very different kind of attitude about farming and land, species, and so on. We need to support those farmers that are struggling to find those ways to do it, and also to support our foodways heritage, in addition to safe and fair, just working conditions. So at Emory, as we try to put all those concerns together, we wanted to come up with some clear guidelines, and we divided all the food we buy into 10 categories. I'm not going to give you all of that, but it's available on the web if you want to see it. Let's just look at milk and dairy. So the way we did this, and any of you who spend time in committees can appreciate how arduous this process was, and I'm sure we revised this document at least 500 times. But for milk and dairy, we said, okay, what's our ultimate goal? Ultimately, what we would like is all the milk and dairy on campus to be from Georgia and to be certified sustainable by the Food Alliance. But we know we can't do that right now. Even if we had infinite money, there isn't that much milk in Georgia, and there's none sustainably certified. So our first priority is let's at least get the hormones and the antibiotics out. And so we're in the process of saying, yes, all of our milk is hormone and antibiotic free. And then we'd like to move to grass-fed, and it's very exciting that there are some new grass-fed dairies moving into Georgia, and we are going to be able to get enough milk from them when they're completely online. Question is, can we get it at a price we can afford? We're not sure about that yet, but we would really like to do that, and we'd like it to be Georgia, but we'll start with regional. So you see how we've built up a priority list, and that gives our buyers a guideline and a sense of where we should start. The priority is a little different for vegetables. Here we said our first priority was regionally grown, and then Georgia and certified sustainable after that. So we really privileged the food miles on this one and decided to wait on the growing, the production strategies. There are concerns about costs, and there are various strategies that we can use to reduce them. We found that we can make a significant difference in our produce purchases right now, just buying regionally without any cost implication. So we were shipping in onions or broccoli or lettuce, and we didn't have to because we just simply weren't tracking where it came from and saying we have a preference for this region. One of the ways, though, that we're trying to work with the larger southeastern community is by getting the word out about what our goals are and why. And we've hired Chaz Holt as a farmer liaison part-time to spread the word, to kind of be our own extension agency. And this is partly because the University of Georgia is one of the states that's a little bit slower to really get on the bandwagon. They're just now starting to offer a program in organic agriculture, and they aren't in a position to say, here's where you can get your supply, the way some states can simply just say, this is what we want, and the Extension Service can provide it. We've had some challenges with distribution that we were talking about earlier, and we've created a relationship with a new produce house that will bulk small quantities from small farms. We also have hired a campus sustainable food education coordinator, Julie Schaefer, has just started this fall to begin to do some of the work to begin to bring all the different constituencies on campus on board. We also have done a number of activities to try to raise awareness around sustainable food. Each fall, we do a sustainable food fair that brings the campus, thousands of people on campus together with vendors and chefs who really talk about this movement locally. And last year, we wanted to get advice from students and also from employees about what were the priorities for them. If we could only have enough money to do a few things, what did they really want to see? And so we invented a 2-day process that I would be happy to share with other schools, where we created a kind of simplified menu, and we said, here's what the budget is, you have this much money, where do you put your money in terms of if you were a dining hall purchaser? And it allowed teams of students, we had almost 100 people involved, to create some very clear priorities about what they want to see of all the things we could be doing in terms of sustainability. We also have these small educational food gardens that are operated as teams of volunteers. And those are the kinds of things that we're doing just to continue awareness. So I would like, at this point, to talk a little bit about the deeper meanings that I see that are behind, because I think there are various levels at which people can participate in a sustainable food project. You can just buy the fresh food and enjoy the taste, or you can have some personal concerns about health and safety, and just want, people talk about NIMB, NIMBY, not in my backyard, and NIMB, not in my body. And so people who want to say, I want to buy organic because I'm concerned, that's one level, and I think we're seeing that growing all across the country. People concerned about antibiotic resistance, hormone residues, contamination with E. coli, and so forth. And I think underneath that is fundamentally a growing distrust of government to certify that our food system is safe. I think we're starting to see a broader societal shift in that regard. I also think we're starting to see a concern about our resources, air, water, oil. What are the ecosystemic consequences of doing conventional agriculture like this? And is this, in fact, a sound future? And I think the doubts about that and the distrust of the land grant, the conventional land grant vision of agriculture, is starting to be more broadly shared. And that also connects with some distrust about what is a good city and how much growth, and should we have an economy based on growth, and how do we deal with issues of sprawl and farmland preservation. And that too is a kind of profound doubt that we should continue to go forward, that I think is embedded in some of these sustainable food activities. And then we're starting to see with some groups concerns about corporate control, genetically modified organisms, control of seed stocks, heavy processing of food, and you'll see in the websites all over the country that colleges and universities are raising questions about, is this really the food system that we want, that is so organized through a processed corporate structure. Coming back again to health, but this time at a more population level, we're seeing all over the country a concern with the obesity epidemic and understanding that we cannot afford to have a third of our children get diabetes. How does that happen? Well, according to Kelly Brownell at Yale, it happens because we have created a toxic environment in which we live that provides stimulus to eat the wrong kinds of food and encourages us to become obese. And so all of the concerns that some people have with energy-dense foods, processed high fructose corn syrup, fast food chains, whatever it is that particular people are concerned about, there's some doubts then about grocery store chains to be providing us really with the qualities of food that we want. So I would argue as an anthropologist that what we're seeing are then deeper values coming into question and a shifting of worldview. I think we're not as sure that a technological fix is the solution. I think we're coming to see some ways in which the expert-led, scientifically driven solutions of the food system in the past may need to shift back to farmer-led, ecosystem-driven, locally based activities. And we also are moving toward respect for that kind of producer. A number of people are writing now about food democracy and the ways in which farmers markets and community gardens and CSAs help create new relationships in urban and small town communities with the farmland around them, generating attention to the full cost accounting, the life cycle accounting of our food system. I hurry to say the caveat is that I don't think that all of these meanings that I've just outlined are shared by everyone in all schools that have these projects. I think people participate at many different levels. But I think it's very interesting that hundreds of schools around the country have created these projects and have brought institutional legitimacy to these doubts and critiques, and also have begun to create some of these new values. We've always had a romance of family farms in America, but now we actually know who the family farmer is. There may be a face on that food. And we're starting to understand it, not from a distanced kind of, oh, I'm going to watch that movie about farmers, but actually college students have sweated and worked on farms and understand what it's about. We're also seeing an emergence of a bioregional sensibility, an attention to the seasons, weather, and the direct relationships that come from understanding a particular place, rebuilding the local, and that involves the wonders of local taste, fresh food, and pleasure. I would argue that individual choice of what to eat for dinner has now become united with ethical dimensions of sustainability. And it's awareness of a union of that individual choice with the impact on workers and the land thousands of miles away. Eating sustainably for young people is often a trendy thing because your peers are doing it. But the range of status foods now includes processes that cross class lines and race lines and engage in activities that restore traditions in a way that has become quite powerful in some parts of the country. They can restore local economies that help students engage in hard physical work in the fields that subverts gender stereotypes. What could gladden the heart of an anthropologist more? The role of higher education is critical in this because we have an important role to test and verify what's really going on, but also to bring our ethical engagement to this work. And in the words of a St. Olaf College student, it brings us back to the fact that the foundation of the ivory tower does indeed rest on the earth beneath our feet. Thank you.
Our panelists are going to speak from the table, and then we'll open it up to questions. Okay? And Peggy, you'll probably want to respond.
Okay.
You might.
This for you.
Okay, is this on? Can you hear me in the back? Great. I just want to ground some of what you've heard in this rapidly growing campus sustainability movement. And I think a lot of this ties back to a talk that David Orr first gave as the commencement address at Arkansas College back in 1990. We had the provocative title, "What is Education For?" And in that talk, he issued an assignment to the university, and that assignment was to envision your university as being part of an environmental system, which of course it is, and study where the inputs are coming from. What are your energy sources? Are you contributing to mountaintop removal for coal, for example? Where does your water come from? How are you using it on the campus? What are you buying? Are you purchasing from inhumane food lots, and so on and so forth? And he challenged students and faculty to integrate these questions into the curriculum and study these various impacts, and from that launched what I consider to be the modern era of the campus sustainability movement. And just a few years after that, a number of people were inspired by his words, and actually right across the street at the UT Health Science Center in Houston, they hired what I believe is the very first campus sustainability officer. It was a guy named George Bandy, who's now a vice president for Interface Flooring, one of the leading sustainable companies moving in a sustainable direction in the United States. They're a manufacturer of commercial carpet floor tile. And just to give you a sense of this movement, between about 1993 and 1994, when George was hired, to late 2004, early 2005, when I came on at Rice, in that time, there had been maybe a total of 50 or 60 campus sustainability officers that were hired. Between then and now, the number is up to almost 200. And at the ASHE conference, I heard a projection that that number is going to be 1,000 by the end of 2010. Similarly, so if you've got a new sort of emerging profession, you need a professional organization. And ASHE, the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education, has become that organization. And they formed in 2006. And their first conference was an overwhelming success. They had 650 people. This was at the ASU campus. And at that time, it was the largest campus sustainability conference ever in the United States. They just held their second conference in Raleigh, North Carolina, and there were almost 2,000 people there. Again, the largest campus sustainability conference ever in the United States. So we're seeing this tremendously rapid growth. And I think Emory has been a leader. You've been at this for roughly 10 years now, and we've certainly looked to Emory as a role model in what we're doing at Rice. And so I would like to have you speak a little bit more about the way in which you are engaging faculty, because I think that's one of the special parts of the story. And if I heard correctly, through the Piedmont Project, you're working with 20 faculty a year to integrate sustainability into your curriculum. So if you've been doing that 5 years, that's 100 faculty members, which is sort of a real game changer in the curriculum as far as I'm concerned. Right. So I'm hoping you could talk a little bit more about that, and about maybe some of the implementation barriers that you've run into, and how you've gotten around those barriers. And I suspect that some of what Jen has to say also dovetails nicely into integrating into the curriculum. So, with that, I'll turn over the microphone.
So I should go next. So I'm Jennifer Rudgers, and my involvement in all of this has been on a relatively small scale. I'm the coordinator for the community garden class on campus, and the community garden. There's been a community garden on campus since 1999. It started out as a student volunteer project, and based on recommendations from a student who was sort of evaluating the state of the garden a few years after it was started, we started a formal course. It's a 1-credit class, repeatable for credit so that there's some continuity in the students that can take it. And we are proud to say we now have 4 gardens on campus. They're associated with the residential colleges. So there's one at Weiss, there's one at Hanson, there's one at Sidrich, and there's one at Martell. And they're covering about 3,800 square feet or so of campus land, which is not a very big area, but it's a good start. And I would say my sort of goals for this class have been, first, to teach what I think is an important life skill, which is how to garden. Second, to incorporate some basic principles of ecology into our understanding of how a garden system works. So thinking about issues like how diversity could help the garden resist invasion to weeds, thinking about the soil microbial community, and how that is important to the sustainability of the garden. And then the last is to try to help make the campus a bit more sustainable by growing some of our own food. And we haven't actually calculated what proportion of the food from the garden is going into the stream, and I think that would be an interesting thing to do. It's a small drop in the bucket at this point. And then the other component of sustainability with the garden is that we're composting some of the food and lawn waste on campus. So that's been my involvement with sustainability on campus. And I guess related to that, I'm interested in sort of what Emory has come up with it, as far as metrics go for sort of measuring the success of sustainability on campus. Because I feel like that's something that we've struggled with, at least in the garden class, understanding how big of a contribution we're really making to sustainability on campus.
That's great. Is it okay if I stay seated, or should I stand up? Because I miss some people. What's your norm? Okay. I guess start with the Piedmont project first, and then turn to metrics. The Piedmont project began because we saw that some faculty really cared about sustainability, but were not going to be able to be involved with the projects on campus. They said, I just don't have time for that. I'm not interested in that. What I have to do is research and teaching, and I don't have time for anything else. So following the rule that I have come to realize, go where the energy is, we said, all right, teaching is what they're interested in. We'll go figure out a program. And I heard about, I basically asked people who were working on sustainability at that time, who does faculty development programs? And they said, well, those folks out at Northern Arizona University are doing the best job. And I found out they were in year 5 of their program, and I got some money to go out and join them and saw their faculty development program. And even though Northern Arizona is a very different kind of school from Emory, with very different teaching challenges, it was a great program. I loved it, and I said, this will work at Emory perfectly. So we came, making long story short, we brought it to Emory. They called their project the Ponderosa Project. We called ours the Piedmont Project because we're located in the Piedmont. And we are now going into year 8, so we have, well over, I don't know, we don't always have 20 absolutely every time, and a few people have left Emory, but we have a lot of folks, probably 120 or more. What is really good, though, is that there are 4 or 5 people in business, and there are 4 or 5 people in law, and there are 4 or 5 people in theology, and there's 4 or 5 people in public health, and they begin to have more of a sense that this really ought to happen. There are 4 or 5 chemists, and so not only is there green chemistry being offered in the labs, but then the chair of the chemistry department has really begun to just have it be more in his consciousness as a result of participating last year. He's now saying, well, now that we do this other program, why don't we see how we can bring that with a more of a sustainability focus, because the students really want it, and we see it growing in that way. We also see the languages, philosophy. Our goal this year is to get a mathematician so that we can see some of those fields where they aren't going to be teaching directly the content, but they can teach it indirectly through what we call the hidden curriculum. We're all going to do in your math course or calculus course problems of some kind. And those problems can be around climate change just as easily as they can be around airplane flow or aerodynamics. So we can see sustainability moving into the fields. The biggest challenges have not been recruiting people because they've been very interested, and it's actually, we've had more interest as time has gone on. But the problems is that people get very excited about meeting each other. Faculty love talking about teaching, which we don't get enough chance to do. We love talking across fields, and then we want to team teach. And I don't know about Rice, but at Emory, that's very difficult. And especially if you're going to team teach across the schools, the accounting is a barrier. It's a real barrier. So we have not been able to do that very much. We have a new assistant provost or some title like that who's just been appointed, whose job is to overcome some of those barriers. So I hope that we'll see some progress there. We have really kind of let 1,000 flowers bloom on the curriculum. We have not particularly said we want to count the flowers or measure or assess what students are actually learning. We've taken the approach of let's stimulate the creativity of faculty, let's give them support, and we'll just see what happens. Some of it we can see. Some of it is amazing. The faculty person from Russian got together with the theater person. They both discovered they loved Chekhov. Chekhov was entranced by his trees. They ended up reading Chekhov, doing a whole part of a play outside under Emory's trees as an activity one spring. You can't program such things, and it's very difficult to count them. But I think they're life-changing and great fun. And so I'm a big proponent of fun. So we have done I've done a lot of surveys. So in terms of metrics, with faculty, I have a lot of that. And I've really been pleased with the willingness of my colleagues to give me information. So I know how many courses and how many students a year. We do know what effect the Piedmont Project has had on people's personal lives, both their daily habits at home and their habits at the office. It's had a major impact. And also collective action. Not a majority, but a significant minority have said, I've started doing this or that community activity or served on a board or doing something more as a result of the Piedmont Project. So we have that kind of evidence. We don't have evidence that we should have about the impact on students. And that's just a really tough challenge for us at this point. Now, turning to measurement, we're going to be developing it, but we don't have it right now because we are part of the ASHE STARS pilot. Are you guys part of the ASHE STARS pilot?
No, I participate in some of those sort of early development and comment on that.
Okay, well, let me explain what it is. So STARS stands for Sustainability, Tracking and
Assessment.
Tracking and Assessment
Research. System.
No, missing the R. Research system? Anyway, you get the idea. You may have noticed that the Princeton Review says here are the 11 greenest schools, and then somebody else comes out and, Emory is one of the 11 greenest schools, but we get a C on somebody else's rating, and there's all these different groups rating us in different ways. Why do we end up with such different ratings has to do with the particular criteria that they're using. The one rating that we get a C on is very heavily weighted toward green endowments, and we're not doing much in that regard with endowments. So we don't get a good rating there, but we get a good rating here. And then ASHE says this is crazy. We should not have 25 different rating systems. We should figure out a series of metrics that we can all live with, that are not too much work to do, that consistently allow us not so much to evaluate whether Emory's greener than Rice or Rice is ahead of somebody else, but whether we're making progress. Well, your point, how do we know who we're affecting and how much? We say we're doing sustainable food. We now know we're doing 56% in the good months of produce being regional. But what is it for the whole year? And how do you measure in the salmon and the chicken and everything else? How do we really say how much impact are we making with our food system? So the ASHE STARS program is being developed, and Emory is one of a group of schools that's being asked to pilot it, which is to say that in the next month my life will consist of metrics, because I have to enter these data, and I've agreed that I'm going to now survey all the faculty of the university to find out how many people are doing research and teaching in this area. So I think what we'll all have are really good, consistent metrics. Do you remember how many points there are altogether?
I believe it's upwards of 100.
Yeah, I think so. So there would be 100 different measurements or more, I think, of particular things. So that, for instance, after I do my survey of how many faculty are engaged in research today that is related to sustainability according to their definition, that will be yes or no on 1 point. So there's going to be all of this massive data collection. But I think it's really a very, very good thing, because it will really force us to be able to say the food system is or is not doing fair trade coffee. You know, at the moment, the food system, the food service tells us we are providing fair trade coffee in every dining room, which I thought meant the coffee is fair trade. No. We are providing it as an option in every dining room. It may mean that it's 1%. I mean, we don't even know, because they're not giving us those figures. Well, now that ASHE STARS has to have that for one of the food points, and there are only 3 or 4 food points, and we're not going to get the one on trayless because we're not doing trayless dining. So we thought, well, maybe we ought to do the fair trade one. You know, so it is going to stimulate us to look closely at those issues. We have a long, long, long way to go. I mean, we have 17,000 employees, and most of them are driving single occupancy vehicles, and most of us live in houses that are not energy efficient, and we live in a part of the country where energy is very cheap, so we have no incentive to do it at this point. We don't have good leadership, and so we have a long way to go, but I'm excited about ASHE STARS as a way to begin to get us a little more realistically looking at what is our impact and then what do we do next.
I believe the R is reporting.
Reporting.
Yes.
Sustainability tracking and reporting system. That's what it is. You're right.
Tracking, assessment, and reporting system.
Are you willing to take questions from the audience now?
Yes, I'd love that.
All right. So we're going to open. Yes. We're going to take questions from the audience. Just wait for someone to get a microphone to you, because this is being recorded and we want to be able to hear your question.
Hello. I was wondering what is Emory doing about seasonal food production? Because this is like part of the local food movement has been to try and maybe encourage more seasonal foods. And what Emory has been doing, like, do you give up certain foods in the winter, or do you bring foods back in the spring and fall? Like, how are you handling that?
We're not doing it. Very simple answer. We would like very much to shift the menus to be more seasonal. And the food service worked a lot this summer to begin to develop some new menus that are seasonal. And it's hard to say exactly now how much better we're doing on that. I think they are working on it. I think it's a really tough thing to do. And I think one of the things we realize is that there's not a lot of student demand yet. So that there's some awareness in sectors, but there are going to be a lot of students who would be very resistant if we did that. And so that's why we hired the Sustainable Education Coordinator to begin to develop more awareness and more momentum, so that we can begin to innovate in some of these ways and have that be a partnership, not oppositional.
No one can object to it. In fact, it's just inspiring and wonderful, the work that you're doing and that we're trying to do at Rice. But you also started this off reminding us of the urgency of these issues. And you talked about we want to preserve farms around cities, but Atlanta continues to sprawl as much as anywhere else. We've got major subsidies continuing for that make organic food far more expensive than pesticide-infested food and so on. Is there some part of this that is focusing on policy changes, on national policy, on coming to grips with the central set of incentives that operate today to make it very unlikely that people will act in the ways that we all need to act if we're going to have solutions in time?
I love that question. You know, before I even talk about policy, you've really put your finger right on this incredible tension that I feel, because on the one hand, I do feel enormous urgency, and on the other hand, I know that people do not change well out of urgency. You know, and that if I'm going to foster a faculty member's taking time away from what he or she does now to do something else, or a student to undertake something, if I'm all, you know, now, urgent, late, danger, it isn't going to work, you know? It's got to come out of the joy of this, and the sense that this is absolutely the most important thing for us to do at this moment in our lives, and therefore we're going to do it. So I feel that tension. I think I probably would behave quite differently if I was in a different state. It is difficult in a state that has a political structure that makes momentum on policy very difficult, very slow. The Georgia State Legislature had a large meeting a year and a half ago to talk about the fact that global climate change was not happening. So we're in a place where it's hard to work on these issues, and there are stalwart leaders in the city of Atlanta who are working on sustainability and are moving it forward, but it's not yet, the system as a whole is not ready to move there yet. And I really see our job at Emory and all the other institutions in town that are moving ahead is to get that first 22% moving. You know, that's the group we have to focus on. Get them up to speed, get them to understand what the issues are so that then we can get moving. And I think actually through the food fair and the courses we've done, the food summit, we have really shifted the awareness so that now with the administration that's coming in, if something were to shift around farm policy, we have people who know what that means and know that it actually connects to Emory's goals. Whereas probably 2 years ago that wouldn't have been the case. So we're getting there. Ultimately, though, I think it really needs a very strong group of faculty for whom that's their specialty, right? And we do have very strong human rights community at Emory connected with the Carter Center. And they have now begun to see environmental rights and sustainability as part of the rights dialogue. They have enormous impact in Washington, around the world. And so I think working with faculty who have expertise in those policy areas, and certainly the folks at the School of Public Health are making great inroads on various public health policy issues. And again, with an administration where we won't see quite so much food corporation dominance in some decisions about the food system, I think we'll be in a very different place to say, this is what needs to happen with school lunch, or this is what needs to happen with recalls of meat, or whatever particular issue it is.
Thank you. You've set some very ambitious goals for the campus. I'd like to ask a question about sort of the bigger area, whether you know if anyone has looked at the question or studied the question. Is it actually possible to feed everyone in the country with sustainable food, or in the world? So, I mean, it's great to do it in these pockets, but is there any hope of getting rid of agribusiness completely and still feeding everybody, or do we have to reduce the population?
I trust Jules Pretty of England, who has done the best research that I've been able to find around it. And he has looked at the productivity of these alternative forms compared to the productivity of conventional. And he is persuaded that we can do it. The average American, I'm told by the medical side, eats twice as much meat as we should for our health. Now right there, if we would cut our meat consumption in half, that would do a lot to release the farmland we need. So probably no. If the whole world were going to eat the amount of meat that the average American eats today, no, we can't do that sustainably. But yes, we can do a healthy diet sustainably for the whole world. Although some people are really saying the population issue is so critical. I'm personally not going there right now as saying we have to reduce population first, but I'm very supportive of nations that are being really rigorous about population. I'm not as critical, for instance, of China as some people are, because I think China had the courage of its convictions to see what it really needed to do a long time ago, and at great human cost, but they really have made some tough choices. And I think the rest of us think we can do this without any tough choices sometimes, and I think you're absolutely right, we can't. But I'm relieved to know that apparently there's been quite a bit of written in the popular press and the semi-popular scientific agriculture press about how organic is not productive enough and can't feed the world. And a lot of that comes from two authors, a father and a son, who are well paid apparently by certain interests. And so it's a real machine of getting that word out. And the new work that's starting to come out at the University of Davis, University of California, Davis, and New Hampshire, and several other places that are really measuring productivity in a number of crops, are finding that those accusations don't hold up. So I think we're not 100% there yet, but I think we've got some good data to suggest, and I trust Jules Pretty because he's done the best survey of developing countries. And he finds amazing productivity increases with relatively minor kinds of innovations that really give me hope. This woman has...
I personally have come to the conclusion, without having an anthropology degree, that we're genetically more programmed to notice the saber-toothed tiger than the flower in terms of behavioral change. And so I have, to the extent I've been working in this area, I have been trying to help communicate the danger, the alarm. And one of the things that I've become convinced of is if we sustain what we got now, we're done for. If we don't get carbon out of the atmosphere quickly, we are not going to make it. And one of the more promising things that I've read about has been biochar, which does fit in with food production. And I wonder if you could comment on that, how real it seems to be. Oh, biochar is, okay, new concept. It's not really new in the sense that indigenous Amazonians used to do it. They would char vegetable matter and work it into the soil, and it fixed the carbon in the soil, made the soil much, much more productive, much richer biological environment, and it takes carbon out of the system and stores it back. And it's people like Jim Hansen have said, you know, this is one of the techniques that we can employ, perhaps through the residue of burning switchgrass and putting it back into the soil to begin to pull carbon back out. And I'm hoping that there's intellectual drive behind this to help make it work at our university level as part of our sustainability.
We actually have a biochar research group here at Rice. Professors Zigorakis and Mazziello are amongst the leaders of that, and we have a student member of that research group here. Jeremy, do you want to offer any comments? I didn't mean to put you on the program, but but as much as we talk about biochar, I figured you'd have something to say.
Well, I wish I had more. I mean, I can just say, for instance, the only thing I've worked on is after Hurricane Ike came through, we had a lot of woody debris down. Houston opened up this recycling contest to deal with that woody debris. And so one of the proposals we had was that you could actually biochar all of this, pyrolyze all of this wood, which means burn it under low oxygen conditions. And I think there's a lot of studies that show that if you amend soils with this biochar, it increases productivity, but there's still a ton of work to be done. I mean, there's maybe, as I understand, maybe 20 or 30 papers on this. And so there's still tons of work, like on water quality issues, air pollution issues with pyrolyzation, stuff like that. So that's about all I know.
Yeah, I would say that it's a very active area of research, and we're still just on the very forefront of understanding the mechanisms by which productivity is increased. It looks like there's likely to be something going on between interactions with the biochar and soil microbes, but it's unclear at this point how exactly it all works. So it's promising, and we have some research groups here even who are trying to figure it all out.
We can teach Emory about it.
some colleges and prep schools are trending away from the old-style infirmary to so-called wellness centers. And I wonder if there's a link between such an activity at Emory or at Rice and cooperation with medical school nearby, because you've got a population you could track whether or not pesticides in the dairy and what all, would make a difference. I mean, if this is contributing to the wellness of your students, this would be a big plus, I would think, if you could establish those links, and you'd get some of that crosstalk that you were hoping for too. So I wondered if that had occurred or is occurring.
Do you want to say something about Rice, or shall I start with that?
Well, I'll just quickly say that we are looking for, we have a farmer's market on campus, which actually is going on right now, and we're looking for someone with a nutritional background on the board, preferably someone over in the medical center, to maybe help start thinking about the types of programs that you just mentioned. But let me let you talk about it from the Emory perspective.
Well, it turns out Emory does have a wellness program that includes encouraging activity as well as healthy eating. There are really big barriers with the Privacy Act for the employer to get access to those records to be able to do large-scale analyses. So it's very difficult to do a real-world experiment like that. But more interesting even, I think, than that is the issue of how do we restore ourselves and how do we undo some of the damage that stress causes. And some of the work of Emory as Place, getting people outside. There's also a component of Emory of Place that looks at mindfulness practices. There's a research project at Emory about meditation and the impact of meditation, which is shown to decrease cortisol and increase, late afternoon, disease resistance, but that's not the word I want. But anyway.
Use of the immune system.
That's what I want. The immune system markers. And so what we're seeing are ways in which we're imagining the component of sustainability that's actually restorative and makes us more whole also may make us more healthy. And I think that's a huge area for future research that we'd really like to see developed.
This is a question for the entire panel. To what extent do you or can you or do you want to include your immediate surrounding communities in your sustainability efforts on campus?
Well, I've actually helped to oversee an intern through Rice's Center for Civic Engagement, which is one of the structures that we use to engage our surrounding community. And she was working with, sponsored by Professor Winnie Hamilton, who's also in the room at Baylor College of Medicine, trying to look for ways to improve recycling amongst the member institutions of the Texas Medical Center. Collectively, it's the world's largest medical center. It's not even appropriate to call it a small city, it's a city. And so we have opportunities in working together to maybe do some things in terms of reducing waste that individually we might not be able to do. We've also had a number of Rice students partner with the city of Houston through CCE and also just working with Bob Stein to help with environmental projects in the city. We have a solar decathlon team that is building an off-the-grid solar-powered house that will be one of 20 featured in the National Mall in Washington, D.C. in the fall of 2009. They're donating their house to Project Row Houses in the 3rd Ward, and they are deliberately designing it to be as inexpensive as possible. We're probably not going to get to the point of a Walmart price house with a big solar panel on top, but that's at least the direction that they want to go. The Rice Design Alliance had this $99,000 house competition in the 5th Ward. So in a lot of ways, I think we're seeing Rice reaching across the proverbial hedges in ways that we didn't see just a few years ago. Let Jen add to that.
Yeah, so I think there are 3 ways in which our group of gardening campus gardeners have interacted with the community. The first is really on a grassroots sort of level. We've had members of the community come out and garden with us, and I actually have a few of them who are taking the class this semester. The second is a slightly higher tier, which is the first year I taught this course, which was last year. We did a whole bunch of field trips. As we were trying to design our own gardens and decide what crops to do, we visited some local farms, some local community gardens, and also a big local composting facility to get some ideas and also just to interact more with the local community. And then the third is that there's an overarching community group in the Houston area called Urban Harvest. They oversee about 150 community gardens in the Houston metro area, and we're a member of that organization. We go to some of their workshops and interact with the broader community through that group. So,
All right, well, perhaps can we draw to a close then? I know that there are some people who want to get a chance to talk with you at the reception, which is out. And so would you all just join me in thanking both Peggy and our panelists for giving us a great overview of things that are happening nationally and here at Rice. It's been a wonderful talk, so thank you all very much.
This program is protected by copyright and may not be redistributed in whole or in part without the express written consent of Rice University Digital Media Services.